In this episode, we'll demonstrate how to debug JavaScript with the Chrome Devtools. Let's take a look at the files I've got here. So I've got an HTML file. I'm loading in jQuery and my own script, and I have a div on the page with the content of hello. If I run this, we can see that the content changes with JavaScript, and there's a JavaScript error. If we look at the script.js file, I've got functions 1 through function 6, and then function 1 calls function 2, calls function 3, 4, etc. down the line. Here we've got a little bit of jQuery, and then each function has a number variable which just contains the number of the function we're in. And then we start the whole chain by calling 1. I'm using the Replit website as kind of my online editor here, but I'm going to switch to this page which has that code actually running. Okay, so if we refresh, see that we've got this error here in the console. Uncaught reference error 7 is not defined. And there's another episode that I have on what an uncaught reference error is and explains that in depth. And I'll link to that in the show notes. All right, so you've got this error. First question you probably have is, okay, where is this? You can click over here. That'll actually lead you to the line, which is pretty helpful. But you often run into situations where it's not this clear-cut, where it's a more complicated error. So I'm going to show you a few techniques here for how to figure out what the error is and how to resolve it. So the first thing we could do is we could set a breakpoint. So we know the error is kind of in this area. So why don't we set a breakpoint here just by clicking on the column here. You can see that adds a breakpoint. So now if we refresh, it pauses execution of the JavaScript there. So it calls 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. And then it's paused right here. This is very helpful because it helps us analyze what the contents of the variables are at various points of the code. It also allows you to step through. So I'm going to show some of those things right now. When we're on this line, number here is undefined. You can see that the local scope, the variable here, is undefined. For here, we've got a call stack, which shows you when one function calls another function, that's what this stack is. So these function calls stack on top of each other. So 1 calls 2, calls 3, calls 4, calls 5. What's helpful is we can step through these. So in function 2, the number variable is set to 2. Function 3, the number variable is set to 3. Most often when you're debugging a problem like this, it's really a question of where did things go wrong and how is my code different than what I expect it to be. So it really becomes an exercise in trying to see somewhere there's a variable here that's different than I expected. And so these tools here really help with that. So we can step through all these and say, okay, what are the variables? And we can also go, if we wanted to, we could go to the console here and we have access to that same variable scope. So I could type number here and it shows me the content in that function. If I went to 3 and I did number again, it would give me 3. Really, really helpful. Then, so let's go back to where we are. So what if we want to move forward? So right now we can see it's undefined. And if we press this button here, we step over the next function call. So it basically moves down one line. And this button, step over next function call versus step, are similar but slightly different, but I usually just use this one here on the left. So now we're on the next line. So now that line 18 has executed, the number variable now holds the string 5, which we can see here by hovering, and we can also see it printed right here. So that's pretty helpful. So next, it's going to execute this jQuery function call. We can inspect here, we can hover over the $sign, and that means that that is defined. Let me demonstrate this next button here. We have step into next function call. Sometimes though, you want to dive into a function call that's to a different module or a different library, and you want to see what's going on there. So let me demonstrate that. I'm going to refresh. So I want to dive into this function call here. So that's where the step into next function call is helpful. So I press the down arrow here, and I can click pretty print because right now this is minified to save file space, but it's really not great to read. And so if I click pretty print here, some of the variable names are still really short, but at least it's formatted better. So you could use this to kind of run through the code and see what the various variables are in the various states. And it's been added to our call stack here. Now sometimes this becomes annoying if you're using a lot of libraries like React and you have your code calling React and then React calling your code. You may not want to see the React code. So in that case, you can right click on this and click black box script, which will mark this file as a file you don't want to see. So it kind of hides it here as a black box item. And if you want to see it, you then toggle that. So that's kind of just a nice way for it to hide library specific things, because most of the time you don't really want to step through library code because you know React for instance, is working fine. There's no bugs there. So you just want to get back to your code essentially and focus on your code and not inspect the library code because there's a ton of it. And often that can really add to the call stack because you have your function calling React, and then React internally is calling 20, 30 functions sometimes. So you don't want to have to step through each of those manually. So that's where black boxing really helps. Okay, so we've got step down, which we just demonstrated. This one here steps one level up. Let me demonstrate that one later. So let's keep going here. Oh, and as it's loading, it's finding an error in jQuery. And that can happen sometimes just when you're refreshing the page. Often I usually just ignore that. It's usually nothing to be concerned about. Okay, so I'm here. We step here to the next one. So sometimes you have a lot of breakpoints like this, and you just want to ignore them for a pass. You can click this button here, which will deactivate the breakpoints, and then everything will load just fine. So it's not pausing anywhere. So I want to bring those back. I want to show this last thing here, which can be pretty helpful. So sometimes you run into situations where you say, okay, I don't know exactly where my error is. I can't quite pinpoint it, but I want to pause right as the error is happening. That's where this last one here is helpful. Pause on exceptions. Let me refresh. So now it'll pause right here where the error is. And it's even showing me what the error is. 7 is not defined. So what's nice here is I can now inspect the contents of this function at this exact time when things are about to go wrong, which is pretty cool. That means I can type number here, which is 6. It's saying that it can't find 7, so let me see. So I know that 6 is a function, 5 is a function, and it's even printing out the contents here. What about 7? Oh, so 7 is not a function or variable. 7 doesn't exist. Okay. So in order to fix this bug, we either need to comment out 7 or we need to create a 7 function. Let me just create a 7 function real quick. Maybe we'll just do a console log, all done. Let's try that. If we refresh, and we still have it set to pause on any exceptions, and it didn't pause. And the console now prints, all done, no more exceptions. Great, that worked. Let me just demonstrate one more thing before we're done. If you know exactly where in the code the issue is happening, you can pause there by using these breakpoints or by using this pause on exceptions button. But another way you can pause through the code is by typing debugger anywhere in your code. So if you do that, that is a signal to the DevTools that it should pause at that exact location. If I refresh here, if my DevTools are closed, nothing happens. But if my DevTools are open and I refresh, it'll automatically pause exactly at that spot, which I can then do everything I did before. Step over, 3, 2, 1. If I want to step out of the current function, I click this and it goes up a level. So now we have 2 items in the call stack. I go up a level, now there's only 1 because it's stepping outside of the current function, going up 1 level. Fantastic. In summary, there's some more things you can do with the DevTools, like setting breakpoints on AJAX calls or when a DOM has changed or on event listeners, but we'll save that for another episode. The DevTools are incredibly useful when you're trying to debug issues. Chrome, Firefox, Edge, Safari, all these have DevTools that are slightly different, but they're all really helpful. I use this anytime I have any sort of JavaScript error. So we can pause the script execution at any point, or if there's an issue here, you can click resume, which will continue until there's another breakpoint, or you can long press here, and then this one will kind of ignore the next breakpoints. So sometimes you're in a situation where you have a lot of breakpoints like this, and if I click this, it'll jump to the next one. Sometimes I'm doing a pass where I just want it to load it and just ignore it temporarily. In that case, I click this and it just keeps playing until there's an error or a different issue. So we've covered how to pause manually with breakpoints, how to pause manually with the debugger command in your code, how to step over a line, how you can dive into a function call and follow that code, how you can pop 1 level higher, 1 level lower, how you can disable all of your breakpoints, and I can only pause if there's an exception. That's it.